Utah politics.
Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Glenn Mills. It is time to go inside Utah politics. We do begin this morning with Salt Lake Tribune columnist Robert Gehrke here for a recap of the legislative session. Always great to have you on the show. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Last year at this time, we spent the entire segment talking about a bombshell in the midnight hour. This year, there was literally no midnight hour.
Midnight hour.
That's how different sessions can be from time to time. So as you take a look at this one overall, how would you define it?
You know, I think the first 2 weeks of the session, we saw those big bills roll out, the voucher bill and the transgender ban, transgender therapy ban. And I think those kind of set the tone for the entire session, everything that was to follow. You know, we also had, I think, a lot of new members, 16 new Republican members, who all came in raring to go and really to make an impact on this session, and I think they did. I think the leadership in the past has been able to kind of rein people in when they went too far. This time I don't think they had that same leverage over this new crowd, and so you saw a different tone, I think. And this is not just me saying this. This is a lot of people I've talked to up on the Hill and in the week since the session ended. It was just sort of a distinctive tone compared to what we've seen in the past.
In your article during the week, you basically said that it was shifting away from the Utah way that we've seen over previous years. Explain what you mean by that.
Yeah, I mean, in the past, we've had these examples of where we've taken these very emotional issues, immigration, LGBTQ issues, and kind of set aside those differences, brought people together, and done the hard work to get to a compromise solution, something that sort of eschews the strident ideological approach that we see in other states. And that, Gary Herbert coined that as the Utah way. I don't think we saw very much of that this session, and I think it partly is because of these new members who were so strident and eager to get things done and make a mark in a way that they kind of come out of this Trump mentality of the Republican Party. And they replaced people who are a lot more moderate in many cases. And so I think it changed the makeup and changed the tone of the session. And we didn't see that sort of collaborative approach. We didn't see that respect for divergent viewpoints and trying to come to something that isn't an all or nothing solution. You
pinpointed, I believe, 4 bills specifically in your argument for that.
Yeah.
It's important to point out that while those were introduced and they were voted on in the session, none of them ended up crossing the finish line. So what do you make of that?
Well, some of them did, some of them didn't. I think the transgender bill is a good example of one that there wasn't this bringing people together and working to find a middle ground. It was just, we now have a ban in place that's immediate and indefinite. I think the school voucher bill is one that we could have maybe come to some compromise on. I think that the sponsor of that tried to hold that back until and then sprung it on the body and early in the session and rammed it through. There were a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion bills.
Those are the ones.
Those are the ones. There was only one of them that got through, Tim Jimenez's bill, that sort of restricts what teachers can teach and how they can teach it when it comes to race and ethnicity. A couple others got derailed, but those aren't going away. These are bills that are going to be back in the next session and the session after that until they pass, because these new members aren't going away. It's just a shift in the tone and a shift in the willingness to have the hard conversations and do the hard work to get to these collaborative, compromise solutions.
Let's focus more on the first 2 weeks. You brought that up already. We knew it was coming before the session started, as we were talking with our sources. We saw a small hint of that the year before with the mask mandate that kind of came out in the first week. Do you think that Republican leadership and legislative leadership is looking at that as a success and maybe something we'll continue to see down the road?
I think it is. I think they realize that if we put all of these big hot button issues at the beginning of the session, then at the end of the session we can focus on the nuts and bolts of why they're there, setting a budget, doing the spending, working through the tax cuts that they wanted to get done, and and then picking up little pieces as it goes. And as a result, I think you saw them finish their work early and still manage to pass more bills than they've passed in history, 575 bills. And so, in terms of the workflow that they've done the past couple of years, I think they kind of have been refining that, and what we saw this year was a product of that.
And do you see that as a successful strategy?
I think from a PR standpoint, for their own purposes, it's a successful strategy because it kind of puts those things behind them. I think from in terms of being able to focus on the big nuts and bolts issues, I think it does that without having the distractions. And it also, I mean, frankly, it gives them a little bit of leverage over members who maybe are on the fence on some of these issues, because if they want their bills to pass down the stretch, they need to be in line early in the session. And so it gives them a lot more leverage and power in dealing with their caucuses.
As you take a look at a whole now that it's over, what do you see as some of the biggest wins during this legislative session?
Yeah, I do a lot of complaining about the things that I think they do wrong, and I could spend a whole show on that. But I think they do deserve some credit for a few things that they did. I'm really pleased with this $200 million they got for water agriculture optimization, because for so long we've been talking about, you know, should we let our lawns die and things like that. That's a drop in the lake, so to speak, for, you know, when we're talking about agriculture using about 3/4 of the water in the state. You know, that's where you need to focus your efforts. So I think that's a good thing. I'm really pleased to see they expanded full-day kindergarten. I think that's going to make a big difference for those kids and their families who are going to have a little bit of breathing room when it comes to childcare. They extended postpartum benefits for new mothers who would, in the past, get kicked off of Medicaid after 60 days after they give birth. Now they have a full year. I think that gives them a lot of peace of mind. Yeah, there were some good things. There's the affordable housing, a tax credit they created, I think $56 million they're putting toward this affordable housing tax credit. That's going to leverage a lot of money and make a big difference when we're talking about getting more affordable housing on the market. So yeah, there are a lot of things that they did well, and I think deserve a lot of credit for.
I heard a lot of lawmakers this year saying, I'm very confident the governor is going to sign my bill, because there seemed to be, to me, I'd like your take on this, there seemed to be, to me, more working together between the legislative and executive branch before getting to the point where it came down to signing the bill, where they kind of came to agreement on a lot of these issues.
Yeah, and I think some of the bills that he might have been candidates for his veto pen didn't make it through, and probably because he engaged in that process early. Yeah, I would be surprised, frankly, if he vetoes any bills. There are groups that are calling for a couple vetoes. One of them on that bill about teaching ethnic and racial issues in school. That was one that people are calling for a veto on. One of them on the language that was added to a bill to allow cougar hunting all year round. Some environmental groups are calling for vetoes on that. I'd be surprised if he vetoes any of it. And I think part of it is the governor realizes he's got to be involved early in the process, because when he vetoed bills in his first term, he got overridden. And so he doesn't want to go through that embarrassment again. And it also doesn't, politically, he wants to protect his right flank and doesn't want to be attacked from the right for vetoing a bill that's popular with them.
Yeah, I don't see any vetoes coming as far as all-out vetoes on bills either. We have about 30 seconds left, but the state flag, that issue was just amazing to watch that happen. And now it's going to referendum, possibly, if they're able to gather the signatures. How did this become so controversial?
This is an issue where we have a very vocal, noisy minority who was going to make a big issue about this being a woke flag. And they showed up and they turned out to their meetings and got the attention of some of the members. But this was not an issue that they can try to get signatures for a referendum. This is not an issue that the public cares enough about to oppose. They're not as worked up as these people are. But it sort of shows the flaw in the process that we have, because you can get these very vocal minorities that can make enough noise that they get their attention of their members and can influence the process in ways that I don't think are healthy or helpful to the process.
And that was probably the issue that the public had the most opportunity to weigh in on than I've seen in a long time.
You had a full 2-year run-up on that one. Yeah,
okay.
and I think from what I've heard from people, they either don't care about the flag or they like it. They think it's a nice change.
All right, Robert Gehrke, appreciate your insight. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah, happy to do it.
Still to come, the Utah GOP chair says he's done after one term, following in the footsteps